So there I was, Captain Maya McKenzie, former military engineer, current professional fixer of things that shouldn't be broken but somehow always are. And where was I using my extensive combat training and tactical expertise? Crawling through the ventilation ducts of the luxury cruise ship Stellar Majesty, trying to figure out why the karaoke machine in the Nebula Lounge kept playing Centaurian death chants instead of Earth pop hits. Yeah, my life had really peaked. The Stellar Majesty was hosting the annual Galactic Peace Summit, which meant the ship was packed with every pompous alien dignitary this side of the Andromeda Galaxy. And let me tell you, when you put that many egos in one place, something's bound to break. Usually the karaoke machine. Take the Centaurians, for instance. These guys had 17 different types of bows for 17 different social situations. I watched one of them spend 20 minutes deciding whether to use the respectful acknowledgement of a being of equivalent social standing, bow, or the polite greeting to a creature whose status I cannot immediately determine, bow, when meeting the janitor. The janitor was a human named Bob. Bob did not bow back. Then there were the jelloids. Imagine a 5-foot-tall pile of purple jello that communicates entirely through interpretive dance. Or interpretive jiggling, I guess. They'd cluster in corners, vibrating at each other in what I assume was profound philosophical discourse. Either that, or they were arguing about the dinner menu. Hard to tell. And don't get me started on the Vex Carry. These insectoid charmers had exactly 2 responses to everything: adequate or requires extermination. I watched one of them evaluate the breakfast buffet for 15 minutes before declaring the scrambled eggs adequate. And the bacon requires extermination. To be fair, the bacon did look pretty questionable. My official title was Chief Entertainment Systems Technician, which was corporate speak for the person we call when rich aliens can't figure out how to make their holosuites work. It beat my last job, which involved actual shooting and considerably less complaining about the Wi-Fi password. The summit was supposed to be all about maintaining galactic peace and harmony, with lots of meaningful speeches about unity and cooperation. In reality, it was mostly an excuse for various species to show off their latest fashions and argue about trade routes. The Centaurians wore elaborate robes that required 3 servants just to carry the train. The jelloids apparently didn't believe in clothes, which was probably for the best considering their whole jiggling situation. The Vex Carry wore what looked like military dress uniforms, complete with about 47 different medals each. Ambassador Quolax was the odd one out. While everyone else was busy being important and impressive, he was this small, furry creature who looked like someone had crossbred a hamster with a particularly anxious accountant. He kept to himself mostly, which was refreshing after dealing with species who considered breathing loudly to be a form of diplomatic insult. The ship itself was a monument to unnecessary luxury. We had zero-gravity tennis courts, a mall with 47 different coffee species, because apparently regular coffee wasn't good enough for diplomats, and a petting zoo featuring what the brochure cheerfully called carnivorous space rabbits. I made a mental note to stay away from that particular attraction. So here I was, surrounded by the galaxy's finest examples of evolved intelligence, and my biggest challenge was explaining to a Centaurian delegate that no, the shower couldn't be programmed to play his personal anthem every time he washed his hair. Some problems, I told him, even advanced engineering couldn't solve. I should have known it was too quiet to last. The first sign of trouble was when the ship's intercom system started playing what sounded like a rejected soundtrack from an Earth pirate movie. You know the type, lots of dramatic drums and poorly synthesized violin sections designed to make you think, oh no, here come the bad guys. I was elbow deep in a malfunctioning entertainment console when Captain Razor Blackthorne's voice boomed over the speakers. And yes, that was actually his name. I later learned he'd legally changed it from Eugene Picklebottom, which explained a lot about his life choices. Citizens of the Stellar Majesty. He announced in the kind of voice that suggested he'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror, "You are now prisoners of the infamous Blackthorne pirates. Surrender Ambassador Quolax immediately, or face the consequences of defying the most feared crew in the galaxy." I peered through a ventilation grate and watched the drama unfold in the main atrium. Blackthorne had clearly watched too many old Earth movies. He wore a coat that was at least 3 sizes too dramatic, had a perfectly waxed mustache that belonged in a museum, and was flanked by a crew of misfits who looked like they'd been recruited from a generic space villain catalog. His first mate was a 7-foot-tall blue alien who kept cracking his knuckles menacingly. His tech specialist was some sort of reptilian creature who hissed every few words for dramatic effect. And his muscle was a robot that looked like someone had tried to build a Terminator but only had access to spare dishwasher parts. "We know he's aboard this vessel," Blackthorne continued, twirling his mustache. "The galaxy's most wanted terrorist, masquerading as a humble diplomat. Hand him over, and we might consider leaving some of you alive." I had to give him credit for commitment to the bit. The man had probably spent hours working on that monologue. Down in the atrium, pandemonium erupted. The Zentorians immediately formed a complex hierarchy of panic, with the highest-ranking members positioning themselves behind progressively lower-ranked members in what I assumed was some sort of traditional coward formation. The Geloids began jiggling frantically, which might have been terror or excitement. Hard to tell with them. The Vex Carry, predictably, declared the entire situation requires extermination and began looking around for weapons that weren't there. This was where Commander Stuffington was supposed to save the day. The ship's head of security was a human who'd gotten his position through what I suspected was nepotism rather than competence. He was the kind of guy who referred to himself as a tactical professional, but couldn't find his own ass with both hands and a GPS unit. "Stand down, pirates," Stuffington declared, stepping forward with all the authority of a mall security guard facing down a biker gang. "This vessel is under the protection of the Galactic Alliance, and I have 17 highly trained security personnel ready to defend it." It was a nice speech. Too bad his highly trained security personnel consisted of 16 part-time guards who were mostly retired mall cops and one enthusiastic intern who'd brought a taser he'd bought online. The pirates made short work of them. I watched from the vents as Blackthorne's crew rounded up Stuffington and his team with all the difficulty of herding particularly slow sheep. The commander's grand tactical plan seemed to involve a lot of shouting and very little actual tactics. "Now then," Blackthorne said, adjusting his coat dramatically, "let's discuss the whereabouts of Ambassador Quillex. I'm sure one of you fine beings knows exactly where to find our furry little war criminal." "War criminal?" I glanced around the atrium until I spotted Quillex hiding behind a decorative plant. The little guy looked about as dangerous as a nervous hamster. Either Blackthorne had seriously bad intelligence, or there was more to the fuzzy diplomat than met the eye. That's when it hit me. The ship's security was down, the pirates were in control, and everyone was looking to someone else to solve the problem. The Zentorians were too busy following protocol to be useful. The Geloids were communicating entirely through panic jiggling. The Vex Carry were arguing about whether the situation was adequate or required extermination. Which meant, once again, it was up to me to fix something that should have been working but wasn't. The only difference was that instead of a broken karaoke machine, I was dealing with a ship full of theatrical space pirates. Great. Just great. You know what they don't teach you in military engineering school? How to fight space pirates using nothing but maintenance tools and an intimate knowledge of luxury cruise ship ventilation systems. Apparently that was an elective I missed. I started small. The Stellar Majesty had artificial gravity generators on every deck, and like most high-end systems, they were ridiculously over-engineered. A few adjustments to the power flow, and suddenly the pirates on Deck 7 were experiencing what I like to call surprise microgravity. From my position in the vents, I watched 3 of Blackthorne's crew members float helplessly near the ceiling, trying to figure out why their feet had stopped working. One of them kept pushing off the walls, spinning like a confused ballet dancer. Another had gotten stuck upside down and was too embarrassed to ask for help. "What's happening to the gravity?" The blue first mate shouted into his communicator. "Technical difficulties," I muttered, rerouting power from the spa's automated massage chairs. Those things had motors designed to knead the tension out of a Zentorian's 17-jointed spine. With a few modifications, they made excellent impromptu weapons. I watched through a security feed as chair number 4 wrapped its mechanical arms around a pirate's leg and began what could only be described as aggressive therapeutic manipulation. The pirate screamed. The chair, programmed for customer satisfaction, interpreted this as a request for deeper tissue work. "This is ridiculous," Blackthorne's voice echoed through the ship. "It's one human with a toolkit. How hard can it be to find her?" "Harder than you think, buddy. I'd spent 3 months learning every inch of this ship's infrastructure. During the Proxima campaign, we used to say that knowing the terrain was half the battle. The other half was not getting shot, but since these pirates seemed more interested in dramatic gestures than actual violence, I was focusing on the first part. My next target was the elevator system. The Stellar Majesty had 12 passenger elevators, but each one equipped with enough safety features to protect a Centaurian dignitary from everything short of a direct hit from a supernova. A few creative rewrites to the control software, and suddenly every elevator on the ship had developed a case of selective hearing. "Deck 3, a pirate would say. "Did you mean the laundry facility?" The elevator would respond cheerfully, whisking him away to spend quality time with industrial washing machines. "Bridge level, you stupid machine." Initiating romantic dinner cruise mode, playing smooth jazz, dimming lights for intimate atmosphere. It was petty, sure, but watching hardened space criminals get serenaded by Kenny G while trapped in an elevator with heart-shaped lighting was surprisingly therapeutic. Of course, I couldn't spend all my time playing with ship systems. The passengers needed someone to blame for their problems, and apparently that someone was me. "Excuse me," a Centaurian delegate called as I crawled past an air vent near the casino. "My personal entertainment unit is malfunctioning. It keeps showing me educational programming instead of my meditation hollows." "We're being held hostage by space pirates," I called back through the grate. "Yes, but surely that's no excuse for poor customer service." I briefly considered redirecting all the oxygen from his cabin to the waste processing center, but decided that might be taking things too far. Instead, I just made a mental note to charge him triple for the next repair. The thing about being a one-woman resistance movement is that eventually you run out of easy targets. After an hour of creative sabotage, Blackthorne's crew had figured out to avoid the elevators, stay in groups, and carry emergency gravity boots. They were adapting faster than I'd hoped. Time for Phase 2 of my master plan, which consisted of making things up as I went along and hoping nobody noticed I had no idea what I was doing. I pulled up the ship's schematic on my tablet. The Stellar Majesty wasn't just a cruise ship. It was a floating monument to excess. Zero-gravity tennis courts, a mall with 47 different coffee species, and yes, that petting zoo with carnivorous space rabbits I'd been avoiding. Suddenly, those ridiculous amenities didn't seem like such a waste of space anymore. By hour 2 of my improvised resistance campaign, the pirates had started taking things personally. Apparently, getting your ass kicked by luxury amenities was bad for crew morale. "Find that human," Blackthorne snarled over the comms. "I don't care if you have to tear this ship apart bolt by bolt." That's when I discovered they'd been searching passenger cabins systematically, which meant they'd probably found Ambassador Quolax's room. Sure enough, the security feeds showed them dragging the little furry guy toward the main atrium. He looked even more nervous than usual, which was saying something. I was preparing to create a distraction involving the zero-gravity tennis courts when Quolax did something unexpected. He started talking. "You don't understand," the ambassador squeaked as they hauled him along. "I'm not who you think I am." "Sure you're not," the blue first mate growled. "Dr. Harbinger Quolax, creator of the most dangerous biological weapon in galactic history." "Wait, what now?" I pulled up Quolax's passenger profile on my tablet. Age, classified. Home planet, classified. Occupation, diplomatic attached/former weapons designer/apparently some kind of galactic terrorist. The passenger manifest had conveniently left out those last 2 qualifications. The peace virus was supposed to end all wars, Quolax was saying as they dragged him through the corridors. It makes violence physiologically impossible. No more conflicts, no more suffering. No more profits, Blackthorne added, appearing on the security feed. "Do you have any idea how much money the galaxy spends on weapons every year?" Your little peace virus would destroy entire industries. Oh, great. So not only was I dealing with theatrical space pirates, but I was also protecting a guy who'd apparently tried to reprogram the entire galaxy to be non-violent. No wonder he looked nervous all the time. I'd be nervous too if half the universe wanted me dead. This called for more drastic measures. The Stellar Majesty's mall was a masterpiece of commercial excess. 47 coffee shops, each specializing in beverages from different worlds. A Zentorian boutique selling robes that cost more than my annual salary. And inexplicably a store that sold nothing but different varieties of decorative crystals. I started with the coffee shops. Each one had industrial-grade espresso machines designed to handle the caffeine demands of diplomatic negotiations. With a few modifications, they became high-pressure projectile launchers. Nothing says space pirate deterrent like getting hit in the face with a stream of scalding Rigelian roast. The crystal shop was next. Those decorative rocks weren't just pretty. They were also really, really heavy. A few adjustments to the mall's automated inventory system, and suddenly the shop's floating display cases were following pirates around like very expensive, very painful pets. What is happening to this ship? Blackthorne shouted as one of his crew members got chased down a corridor by a display case full of Arcturian mood stones. But the real fun started when I reached the petting zoo. The carnivorous space rabbits were exactly as advertised, adorable, fluffy, and capable of chewing through hull plating if properly motivated. The zoo's automated feeding system was designed to keep them calm and docile. I reprogrammed it to make them excited and hungry. 27 carnivorous space rabbits, each about the size of a house cat and twice as vicious, suddenly found themselves free range in the ship's corridors. The pirates went from hunters to hunted in about 30 seconds. "They're so fluffy," one of the reptilian crew members hissed as a rabbit latched onto his boot. "Why are they trying to eat me?" "Because you smell like fear and processed food," I called through the intercom. "Try bathing more often." I was starting to enjoy this. But Blackthorne was smarter than his theatrical persona suggested. While his crew dealt with gravity malfunctions, hostile furniture, and carnivorous pets, he'd figured out the one thing I hadn't planned for. He took Quillex to the bridge and locked it down. "Attention, mystery saboteur," his voice echoed through the ship. "I have your precious ambassador, and in exactly 1 hour, I'm going to space him unless you surrender yourself. No more games. No more tricks. Just you, me, and a conversation about why you're making my life so unnecessarily complicated." Through the security feeds, I could see Quillex tied to a chair on the bridge, looking more terrified than ever. Blackthorne stood behind him, no longer twirling his mustache. The theatrical villain act was gone, replaced by someone who was clearly getting tired of being outsmarted by a maintenance technician. 1 hour, he repeated. "Bridge level, come alone, or the fuzzy little war criminal gets a really close look at the vacuum of space." I stared at the security monitor, weighing my options. I could keep playing games with the ship's systems, but eventually he'd get frustrated enough to follow through on his threat. And despite everything, Quillex didn't deserve to die just because he tried to make the galaxy a more peaceful place. Time for the final phase of my plan, which I was definitely going to have to make up on the spot. This was going to get interesting. You know what's great about luxury cruise ships? Everything is designed for maximum drama. Take the Grand Ballroom, for instance. Holographic chandeliers, a dance floor that could display any pattern you wanted, and enough space to host a diplomatic reception for 300 beings. It was also directly below the bridge, connected by a maintenance shaft that the ship's designers had thoughtfully included for emergency repairs. I had 45 minutes to turn a party venue into a trap. Fortunately, the Galactic Peace Summit's closing ceremony was scheduled for that evening, which meant the ballroom was already set up with enough decorations and catering equipment to outfit a small army. "Attention passengers," I announced over the intercom. "This is your Chief Entertainment Systems Technician. Please report to the Grand Ballroom immediately for an emergency diplomatic consultation." The Zentorians arrived first, of course. They'd spent the entire crisis trying to determine the proper protocol for responding to pirate attacks. Apparently, there were 14 different diplomatic procedures for hostile boarding, but none of them covered the specific situation of being rescued by maintenance staff. "Is this appropriate?" their lead delegate asked, looking around the ballroom with concern. "Should we be using the formal arrangement or the semi-casual clustering pattern?" "Whatever keeps you alive," I called from the ceiling, where I was busy rewiring the holographic projection system. "Just spread out and try to look diplomatic." The jelloids jiggled in next, communicating in rapid purple vibrations that I assumed meant either this is exciting or we're all going to die. With them, it was hard to tell the difference. The Vexkari were last, naturally. They'd spent 20 minutes debating whether the ballroom situation was adequate or required extermination before finally deciding it was acceptable pending further evaluation. "Listen up," I told them, dropping down from the ceiling with my toolkit. "In about 15 minutes, Captain Blackthorne is going to walk through that door expecting to find me surrendering peacefully. Instead, he's going to find all of you doing what you do best." "Which is what, exactly?" asked a Zentorian delegate. "Being yourselves." Aggressively. I started with the holographic system. The ballroom's projectors were designed to create immersive diplomatic environments, peaceful gardens, flowing waterfalls, that sort of thing. With a few modifications, they could create something much more interesting. "Zentorians," I called, "when I give the signal, I need you to activate every single diplomatic protocol you know. All of them. At the same time." "But that would create a paradoxical social situation," their delegate protested. "The conflicting etiquette requirements would be impossible to resolve." "Exactly." "Next, the jelloids. I need you to do that jiggling thing you do, but make it seismic. Really put your backs into it." They wobbled enthusiastically. I took that as a yes. "Vexkari, you're my weapons experts. See those catering robots? They're armed with high-pressure sauce dispensers and molecular gastronomy equipment. Think you can turn them into non-lethal crowd control devices?" "This task is adequate," their leader declared. High praise from an insect warrior. I spent the remaining time turning party decorations into impromptu engineering projects. Streamers became tripwires. Balloons filled with helium became floating obstacles. And the centerpiece of my trap was the dance floor itself, which I'd programmed to display a pattern that would make anyone looking at it feel like they were falling through space. Right on schedule, the ballroom doors burst open. Blackthorne strode in, dragging Quillex behind him, flanked by what remained of his crew. They'd managed to round up most of the carnivorous space rabbits, though I noticed several bite marks on their uniforms. "So," Blackthorne announced, "the mysterious saboteur finally shows herself." "That's Chief Entertainment Systems Technician to you," I replied, stepping into the middle of the ballroom. "And welcome to the closing ceremony of the Galactic Peace Summit." He looked around at the assembled delegates with confusion. "These are just passengers. Harmless diplomats." "You've clearly never been to a diplomatic function," I said, and triggered the trap. The holographic projectors activated first, filling the ballroom with a swirling vortex of lights and colors that made depth perception impossible. The Zentorians immediately launched into their conflicting protocol routine, bowing in 17 different directions while reciting diplomatic greetings in 12 languages. The resulting chaos was like watching a martial arts demonstration performed by people who'd forgotten which martial art they were supposed to be demonstrating. The jelloids began their seismic jiggling, causing the entire floor to vibrate at frequencies that made standing difficult. The pirates stumbled around like they were trying to walk on a trampoline during an earthquake. And the Vexkari turned the catering robots into an army of sauce-dispensing warriors. High-pressure streams of marinara and hollandaise sauce filled the air, coating everything in a slippery, aromatic mess. "What is this madness?" Blackthorne shouted, slipping on a patch of béarnaise sauce and grabbing onto a streamer for support. The streamer, of course, was one of my tripwires, which activated the balloon obstacle course. Within 30 seconds, the grand ballroom had become a chaotic fusion of diplomatic protocol, interpretive jiggling, condiment warfare, and party decorations. It was like someone had put a peace summit, a food fight, and a children's birthday party into a blender and hit puree. I grabbed Quillex during the confusion and pulled him toward the emergency exit. Time to go. Ambassador. How did you know they would do all that? He squeaked as we made our escape. Easy, I said. Watching through the doorway as Blackthorne's first mate got tackled by a Zentorian delegate who was trying to execute a formal greeting for beings encountered during hostile social circumstances. I just gave everyone permission to be themselves as loudly as possible. Diplomats love an audience. Behind us, the ballroom had descended into complete chaos. The pirates were trapped in a maze of diplomatic courtesy, seismic jiggling, and aggressive catering equipment. It would take them hours to sort out the mess, by which time Galactic Alliance security would have arrived. You know, Quillex said as we made our way to the ship's communication center, for someone who fixes karaoke machines, you're remarkably good at this. Yeah, well, I replied. Turns out the skills transfer pretty well. 3 hours later, the Stellar Majesty looked like it had hosted the galaxy's most chaotic diplomatic reception. The ballroom was still covered in sauce. The Zentorians were still arguing about proper protocol for post-crisis etiquette. The Jelloids had apparently jiggled themselves into a state of exhaustion and were recovering in the spa. And the Vex Carry were systematically cataloging everything they'd encountered as either adequate or requires extermination. The sauce apparently was adequate. Galactic Alliance security had arrived to find the pirates tied up with party streamers and covered in hollandaise sauce, still trying to figure out what had happened to them. Captain Blackthorne kept muttering something about impossible diplomatic procedures and weaponized customer service. I was back in the ventilation system, trying to fix the air conditioning that had started this whole mess, when Admiral Torres from Galactic Command called me on my personal communicator. "McKenzie," she said, "we need to talk." 20 minutes later, I found myself in the ship's conference room, facing Torres and a panel of Alliance officials. Quillex sat beside me, looking significantly less nervous now that he wasn't being hunted by theatrical space pirates. So Torres began, "Let me see if I understand this correctly. A decommissioned military engineer working as maintenance staff single-handedly defeated a pirate crew using karaoke machines, massage chairs, and carnivorous space rabbits. Don't forget the sauce," I added. The sauce was crucial. Torres stared at me for a long moment. "McKenzie, how would you feel about a career change?" "Depends. Does it involve fixing broken electronics for entitled aliens?" "Not exactly." She slid a data pad across the table. "We're creating a new position, Creative Solutions Specialist. Basically, you'd handle impossible situations that conventional tactics can't solve." I looked at the contract. The pay was good, really good. And the job description was refreshingly honest, professional problem solver for scenarios that shouldn't exist but somehow do. "There's just one catch," Torres continued. "This whole pirate attack, it wasn't random." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "We've been looking for someone to protect Dr. Quillex and his peace virus research. Someone unconventional enough to think outside normal security protocols, but skilled enough to actually pull it off. So we arranged a little test." "You set up the pirate attack?" I looked at Quillex, who had the grace to look embarrassed. "Not exactly," Torres said. "We just let it be known that Quillex would be on this ship. Blackthorne was going to come after him eventually anyway. We just made sure it happened in a controlled environment where we could evaluate potential candidates. And I was the candidate." "You were the only candidate. Everyone else we considered would have tried to solve the problem with conventional weapons and tactics. You turned a cruise ship into a weapon." I had to admit, it was flattering in a deeply twisted way. "So what's the real job?" "Protecting the peace virus research. Quillex's work could end interstellar conflicts permanently, but only if it stays out of the wrong hands. We need someone who can keep him safe using methods that no one would ever expect." I looked around the conference room. Torres was serious. The other officials were nodding along. And Quillex was giving me what I assumed was an encouraging smile, though it was hard to tell with his species. "Just one question," I said. Does this job involve attending diplomatic dinners? Frequently. Then I want hazard pay for social interactions, and I'm not wearing fancy clothes. Done. I signed the contract. As I handed it back, Torres smiled. Welcome to the most unconventional job in galactic security, Mackenzie. Try not to weaponize too much of the furniture. No promises, I said, but I'll keep the sauce usage to a minimum. 3 months later, I was living in a secure facility that looked suspiciously like a luxury resort, protecting a nervous hamster scientist who was trying to save the galaxy one piece virus at a time. My official title was Creative Solutions Specialist, but everyone just called me Mac the Problem Fixer. And you know what? It beat fixing karaoke machines any day of the week. Even if the job did involve way more diplomatic dinners than I'd originally bargained for.